Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Peppercorn Pork Chops. That's right, I probably should have said peppercorns, since I actually ended up using 4 kinds, which produces one of the most flavorful pork chops you will ever enjoy in your life. And if you're thinking that sounds great, but is there any way we can get some more pepper? Well, yes, we can. Because on top of all this deliciousness, we are going to serve a warm homemade pickled pepper relish, which elevated this dish even more. And to get started, we're going to need a couple tablespoons of whole peppercorns. And while you can totally do this with just the black ones, as I mentioned, I'm actually going to use 4, which besides the black ones will include white, pink, and green. And while they do sell all these separately, you can often find them all in the same package, which is what I'm using here. And what we'll do to prep these is go ahead and transfer them onto a cutting board. And then using the flat bottom of a heavy pan or pot, we're basically going to crush and grind these down as fine as we want. Which for me is going to be pretty coarse. But of course, you can go a little finer if you want. And by the way, I'm not just using the flat bottom, but I'm also using that rounded edge to do a lot of the grinding. And then what we'll do once that's been completed is transfer those back into the pan. And that's it. Once our peppercorns are prepped, we can move on to prep our pork. And what I have here are 2 thick cut, boneless, center cut pork chops, which weighed in at about 8 to 9 ounces each. And before these get seasoned, what I like to do is take a sharp knife and make like 3 cuts through the fat just until the blade hits the meat. And the reason is, underneath that little layer of fat, which I definitely want to leave on for flavor and richness, there's a very tough membrane that will sort of contract as these cook, and it will sometimes cause the chop not to lay flat in the pan. So by making some shallow cuts like this, that membrane won't be able to pull as tight, and I think it might make these a little easier to sear. Okay, I can't prove it, but I have a good feeling. But whether you bother doing that trick or not, we are going to want to season these very, very generously on both sides with some kosher salt. And I know it always looks like a ton, but that is a very large and flaky crystal of salt I'm using. In fact, I'll even tell you the brand. It's Diamond Crystal. So I'm not using quite as much as it might appear. But on the other hand, these are very thick pieces of meat, and we do want to be fairly generous. And then speaking of generous, once those have been properly salted, we'll go ahead and apply our crushed peppercorns to both sides. And as we do this, I kind of like to press it into the meat. And in the great tradition of steak au poivre, I like to go for pretty much full coverage, which yes, is going to be quite spicy and aromatic. And if you only wanted to do half this amount, that would still be fine. But when it comes to my chops, I am not going to be shy with the pepper. And then what we need to do once these have been seasoned is transfer them onto some kind of rack so we get some nice air circulation underneath. And if you don't have one of those, don't worry. You can just twist up some aluminum foil into like ropes and make your own rack. But the point is, some air circulation underneath is a good thing, because a dry pork chop is a nicely seared pork chop. So we don't really want this sitting in its own juices. And then what we'll do is let this dry brine, as it's called, in the refrigerator from anywhere between 4 and 12 hours, or off the record, on your countertop for 1 hour. And is that dangerous? I hope not, otherwise I'm going to get in big trouble. But because these are salted and seasoned, I don't think it is. And then what we can do while our pork is sitting there absorbing all those beautiful flavors is we can move on to make our very simple, very quick and easy pickled pepper relish, which will start with about a half a cup of any kind of diced pepper you want. All right, I went with some green poblano, as well as some orange and red baby bell. I also tossed in 2 or 3 cloves of minced garlic, a nice big pinch of salt, and of course a few shakes of cayenne. And then we'll finish this up with a very generous splash of seasoned rice vinegar. And we'll go ahead and give that a mix. And of course, if you want to add some hot peppers to this, or actual pickled peppers out of a jar, or maybe some finely diced onion or scallion, go for it. I mean, you are after all the Peter Piper of what to pick for your pickled peppers. But other than the garlic, I was pretty much going for a pure pepper experience here. And what we'll do once that's mixed is go ahead and wrap it up and leave it right on the countertop near our pork for about an hour, which is going to be plenty of time for those fresh peppers to become quickly pickled peppers. Oh, and by the way, seasoned rice vinegar has sugar and salt in it. So if you happen to be using regular rice vinegar, you will want to add a small pinch of salt and a very large pinch of sugar. Oh, and if you are using the highly controversial method of leaving your pork out on the counter for an hour, I think we should give it a flip halfway through. And if I happen to notice a spot that doesn't look like it has enough pepper for my taste, I will not hesitate to reapply. And that's it. Once our pork and pickled peppers have sat long enough, we can head to the stove to sear our chops, which I'm going to do over medium-high heat in a little bit of olive oil or vegetable oil. And once that oil is nice and hot, we can go ahead and transfer our pork in. And if you're using approximately 8-ounce chops like I am, we are going to sear these for about 5 minutes per side. And if somehow a whole peppercorn got through your defenses, you can go ahead and pull that out. So I gave that first side exactly 5 minutes, and then flipped them over. And that beautiful brown sear you see on the surface is not just because of the hot pan, it's because our pork was nice and dry going in that hot pan. Which again is why I like to dry brine it on a rack. And then once flipped, we'll give that second side about the same amount of time. Although maybe a touch longer, because while that second side is searing, sometimes I like to grab my tongs and sear the edges a little bit as well. Okay, in this short amount of cooking time, you're not really going to be able to brown those edges, but I do feel better if they've been cauterized a little bit. And as far as doneness goes, feel free to use a thermometer to whatever your ideal target temperature is, which for me I think would be about 140-ish. But generally I do like to just go by feel. And once they've firmed up and kind of spring back to the touch, I am pretty sure they're done. Okay, if they feel kind of mushy and don't spring right back, they're undercooked. And on the other hand, if they feel really hard, you went too far. But regardless, once we think our chops have cooked long enough, we can turn off the heat and transfer those onto a plate, where we will let those rest loosely covered in foil. And then to our still very, very hot pan, we will add a little splash of chicken broth, or pork broth if you have it, which you don't. And if times are tough, you can just use a little bit of cold fresh water. And we will turn our heat back on to high and bring this up to a boil. And once that does come up to a rolling boil, we'll go ahead and transfer in our quickly pickled pepper relish. And we'll give it a stir with our spoon. Of course, as usual, scraping all that goodness off the bottom. And basically all we're going to do here is cook this for a couple minutes until the liquid in the pan reduces by about half. And as always, if there's any accumulated juices on the plate, we will definitely pour those back into the pan. And know that we're not a lot, because we did not overcook our pork and squeeze out all the juice. But anyway, like I said, we'll go ahead and let that boil for a few minutes, until it reduces by about 50%, at which point we will turn off the heat, and we will finish this pan sauce in the classic French manner, by stirring in a nice chunk of cold butter, and we will keep stirring until that disappears, at which point it is ready to serve. And besides adding the obvious flavor and richness, we need that fat to balance the acidity of the peppers and the vinegar, which is why salad dressings are just not vinegar or lemon juice. Alright, there's a reason we whisk in a certain amount of oil. Okay, so the same principle applies here. And that's it. Once that butter disappears, we are ready to serve up, which I'm going to do next to some of my mom's famous scalloped potatoes, which I'm going to make sure I've done a video for. Because if I haven't, that has to go on the list right away. But no matter the side, we'll go ahead and serve that up, with plenty of that hot pickled pepper relish over the top. And not only do I think this looks beautiful, I think it looks happy. Alright, if you're feeling kind of blue, just make and stare at something like this for a few minutes. It does wonders. But anyway, enough staring. Let me grab a fork and knife and dig in. And that, my friends, was one of the most delicious pork dishes I've had in a long time. Alright, we have that very tender, still moist, perfectly cooked pork, with those sharp, aromatic, fairly spicy peppercorns embedded in that crusty surface, with everything being perfectly balanced by that sweet and sour pepper sauce over the top. Right, when your average person hears the term sweet and sour pork, they don't think of something like this, but they should. And again, the amounts are up to you, and you don't have to cover the entire surface with the peppercorns, because it is fairly spicy, but for me that is the best way to enjoy this dish. And yes, to answer the other obvious question, you can taste the difference if you use all the different peppercorns versus just using the black. Okay, especially the pink and the green ones. They definitely feature a subtle, but noticeably different flavor. And I feel like I have to say this every time I do a pork chop video, but if you're still scared of eating pork that has a very, very tiny pink hue still to the meat, which indicates that it's not over, but rather perfectly cooked, you really need to get with the program and throw away those 75-year-old cookbooks that tell you to cook it to 185. Alright, as far as I'm concerned, this is 100% safe to eat, notwithstanding cholesterol issues. So please, I implore you, do not overcook your pork chops. And for one final indication as to how just incredibly amazing these pork chops were, I haven't even thought of taking one bite of those incredibly delicious looking scalloped potatoes. So let me fast forward to a few bites later when I finally did. And like I said, I have to check and make sure we did a video for that, since that is a must-have in the recipe collection. But anyway, that's it. What we're calling peppercorn pork chops. If you are a lover of pepper in all its forms, you really must experience this dish. And if you're not, you should make it anyway, so that you really know for sure. And that's why I'm going to finish up by saying to everyone, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.